my life while I was growing up and working around the country at different jobs and things, and always done or tried to do things for the Indian schools and Indian children. And
something unexpected is coming to light about the life of Hollywood actor Will Sampson. For years, many people remembered him for his powerful role as Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. But behind his famous career was a man with a remarkable past, strong beliefs, personal struggles, and experiences that Hollywood rarely talked about. So, what was Will Sampson really like away from the cameras? What challenges did he face before becoming a Hollywood star? And why did so much of his incredible story remain unknown to the public? So, what do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. To help us create more videos and uncover fascinating stories from Hollywood's past, please subscribe. Will Sampson beginning. William Sampson Jr. was born on September 27, 1939, in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. His parents, Wiley and Mabel Lewis Sampson, were both full-blood Muskogee Creek Indians. At home, his family called him Sonny. At the same time, he was given the Muskogee name KVQS, or Kevagay, which meant left-handed. As it turned out, that left hand would become an important part of his life because from the moment he could hold a pencil, Sampson was drawing. He drew almost anywhere he could. If he had a piece of paper, he used it. If there was no paper, he found something else. He would draw on his sister's schoolbook covers, and when those were no longer available, he would simply go outside and draw pictures in the dirt with a stick. To him, drawing was not about becoming famous. It was simply something he loved to do. His sister Norma remembered just how much her younger brother enjoyed drawing. Whenever he had a pencil and something to draw on, he would get to work. However, she did not always understand how important those drawings would become. In fact, Norma sometimes took his drawings, crumpled them up, and threw them into the trash. At the time, she had no reason to think those simple childhood drawings were worth saving. Years later, though, she would look back on those moments and laugh about them. Still, there was a little regret behind the joke. She would say that she never imagined there would come a time when she could not even afford to buy one of her brother's paintings. The drawings that once ended up in the trash would eventually become valuable pieces of art. The little boy whose pictures seemed unimportant would grow into a respected painter whose work people wanted to own. He appears to have left school around the 9th grade. For many people, leaving school so young might have meant missing out on an education. But for Sampson, life itself became his classroom. First, he learned through hard work. He became a rodeo cowboy and spent time around horses. Then, he joined the Navy, where he experienced a completely different kind of life. Later, he worked as an oil field roughneck, taking on difficult and demanding jobs that required strength and determination. Along the way, he kept painting. Even while working tough jobs and living a very different life from the one he had as a child, painting remained close to his heart. In other words, his education did not come from sitting in a classroom. It came from the places he went, the people he met, and the work he did. His real lessons came from the back of a horse, the deck of a Navy ship, the rough world of the oil fields, and eventually from the canvas in front of him. At this point, Hollywood was probably the last place anyone would have expected Sampson to end up. He was not chasing movie roles, and he was certainly not building a plan to become a famous actor. An opportunity would eventually bring him in front of the cameras, and that opportunity would completely change the direction of his life. Before long, the tall Native American painter from Oklahoma would become known to millions of people. He would take on the role of Chief Bromden and share the screen with major Hollywood names. And yet, even after becoming famous, the artist inside him never disappeared. So, how did a 41-year-old cowboy with no acting experience suddenly become a Hollywood star? What was Will Sampson doing before Hollywood came calling? Let's find out. Will Sampson's incredible journey. Will Sampson stepped onto a rodeo arena for the first time when he was only 14 years old. At that age, most teenagers were still trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives, but Will was already getting used to the rough and dangerous world of rodeo. For the next 20 years, he traveled from one rodeo to another, taking part mainly in saddle bronc riding and bull riding. He competed throughout Oklahoma and across the American West, chasing prize money wherever he could find it. But rodeo was not an easy way to make a living. The money could come in quickly, but it could also disappear just as fast. One good competition might put some cash in Will's pocket, only for that money to be gone after a few weeks. While Will was building his life as a cowboy, he was also serving in the United States Navy. From 1953 to 1955, he served in the Navy, adding another completely different experience to his already unusual life. Somewhere during that period, Will learned how to fly a plane. However, his sister Norma later made sure people understood exactly what happened. Will was in the Navy, and he did learn how to pilot a plane. But he was not a Navy pilot. Norma was very particular about that detail. To her, the truth mattered, and she wanted people to know the real story rather than turn Will's life into something it wasn't. After leaving the Navy, Will returned to civilian life and took whatever work he could find. He worked in the oil fields, took jobs as a roughneck, worked construction, and spent time as a lineman. In other words, Will was not afraid of hard work. He moved from one job to another simply because he needed to keep money coming in. There was no glamorous lifestyle waiting for him. Most days were about working hard, paying the bills, and moving on to the next job. No matter how busy or difficult his life became, he never stopped painting. Whenever he had the chance, Will would pick up his brush and work on his art. He painted Western landscapes, traditional Muskogee scenes, horses, buffalo, and people who reminded him of the world he knew. His work was sometimes compared to the paintings of Charles M. Russell, a famous artist known for capturing the American West. Russell had become famous for painting the Western world, but Will had actually lived parts of that world himself. He was a Muskogee Creek man who understood the people, animals, landscapes, and traditions he was putting onto the canvas. And that difference was important. Some people bought his paintings, and whenever Will made money from his artwork, he enjoyed himself. His sister remembered that he would have a great time while the money lasted. Unfortunately, it usually did not last very long. Soon, Will would find himself looking for another job again. His sister Norma even described him as a starving artist because that was basically what his life looked like at the time. Then, there was Will himself. He was impossible to ignore. He had grown beyond 6 feet while he was still a teenager and eventually stood somewhere between 6'4" and 6'7", depending on who was measuring him. He had enormous hands, a deep, powerful voice, and a face that seemed to belong to the Oklahoma landscape. But despite looking like someone who could easily command attention, Will had absolutely no connection to Hollywood. At 41 years old, he had never acted before. He had no agent, no Hollywood friends, and no plan to become famous. He was simply a cowboy, artist, worker, and former sailor trying to get through life. One ordinary day, a used car dealer picked up a telephone. That phone call would lead Will Sampson somewhere he never expected to go, and eventually turn the 41-year-old cowboy into one of Hollywood's most unforgettable Native American stars. But how could a simple phone call from a car dealership in the Pacific Northwest somehow make its way to the offices of a major Hollywood production? What really happened when Will Sampson walked into a Hollywood casting office carrying his paintings? Let's find out. Phone call that changed Sampson's life. In 1975, producers Saul Zaentz and Michael Douglas were getting ready to turn Ken Kesey's famous novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, into a movie. The story was about rebellion inside a mental hospital. They already had Jack Nicholson for the main role, and Milos Forman was set to direct. Everything seemed to be coming together. They still needed the most important character in the story, Chief Bromden. Chief Bromden was a huge Native American man who had spent years inside the hospital pretending that he could not hear or speak. He was supposed to be physically massive, and that size was a major part of the character. So, the filmmakers needed a real Native American actor who could actually look the part. Casting a white actor and simply making him look Native American was not going to work. Chief Bromden's size and identity were too important to the story. Michael Douglas happened to sit next to a man named Mel Lambert during a flight. Lambert was a used car dealer and rodeo announcer from Yakima, Washington. His father had also built a successful car business by selling vehicles to many Native American customers in the area. During their conversation, Douglas mentioned that the movie was searching for a very tall Native American actor. Lambert remembered it, but nothing happened right away. Months passed, and the search continued. Then, About 6 months later, Lambert suddenly picked up the phone and called Douglas. According to one version of the story, Lambert told him that he had just seen the biggest Native American man he had ever come across. That man was Will Sampson. However, there is another version of how Sampson first heard about the movie, and this one comes from his own sister. She said Will was up in the mountains near Yakima, working on one of his paintings, when a friend from town told him that a movie was looking for a very tall Native American man. Will's response was simple: why not? That was just the kind of person he was. He was not afraid to take a chance, even when the odds were against him. And once Will finally met the filmmakers, things became even more interesting. He walked into the casting office carrying some of his paintings under his arm. Will knew he had never acted before, so he had a backup plan. If they did not want him as an actor, maybe they would at least be interested in his artwork. They hired him to play Chief Bromden, and they bought his paintings too. The first time Will stepped onto the small production plane, Jack Nicholson reportedly saw him and immediately recognized what everyone had been looking for. Nicholson climbed into Will's lap and kept repeating, "It's the Chief, man. It's the Chief." Will Sampson had never acted in his life. He had never appeared in a school play, never performed in a local show, and had not even practiced acting in front of a mirror. He was about to share the screen with Jack Nicholson, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, in a film that nobody yet knew would become one of the most respected movies ever made. How did Will Sampson steal scenes from Jack Nicholson without barely saying a word? What did Will Sampson refuse to let Hollywood do to his character? Let's take a closer look. Sampson's shocking performance. When One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest reached theaters in 1975, it quickly became one of the biggest films Hollywood had ever seen. The movie did far more than attract audiences. It changed the industry and became a major part of film history. The movie achieved something extremely rare at the Academy Awards. It won all 5 of the biggest awards: Best Picture, Best Director for Milos Forman, Best Actor for Jack Nicholson, Best Actress for Louise Fletcher, and Best Adapted Screenplay. At the time, only 2 other movies in history had managed to win all 5 of those major awards. The film made more than $108 million in the United States, which was a huge amount considering that the movie had been made for only about $3 million. That made it the second highest grossing movie of 1975, behind only Jaws. Sampson played Chief Bromden, a huge and quiet man who spent most of the movie watching everything happening around him. He did not need many words to make people notice him. His size, facial expressions, and body language often told the audience what his character was feeling. Chief Bromden was presented as a man who had almost completely disappeared into himself. He pretended to be deaf and unable to speak, while Nurse Ratched controlled the hospital ward with an almost frightening level of power. The place felt less like a hospital and more like a prison. The patients were either trying to fight against the system or slowly losing themselves inside it. He barely said anything. The moment he finally spoke became one of the most memorable scenes in the entire film. It happened when McMurphy, played by Jack Nicholson, gave Bromden a piece of juicy fruit gum. Bromden looked at it and quietly said, "Juicy fruit." After spending so much time watching this giant man remain silent, hearing his voice for the first time made the character feel completely different. It also showed how much emotion Sampson could communicate without saying very much. The Nation magazine pointed this out, saying that if anyone could steal a scene from Jack Nicholson, it was Sampson. Journalist Dick Kleiner also wrote about Sampson in 1976 and described his acting as instinctive. Sampson did not seem like someone trying hard to act. His performance felt natural. Milos Forman had taken a chance by giving an important role to a man who had never acted in a movie before. Sampson had no long film career behind him. He was not a trained Hollywood star. The decision worked. Sampson did not want Chief Bromden to become another lazy Hollywood version of a Native American character. He did not want the character speaking in broken English, making strange sounds, or acting like a stereotype, because that was what Hollywood audiences had been shown for years. In a 1976 interview with the New York Times, Sampson explained that he refused to let the character become part of Hollywood's long history of presenting Native Americans in insulting and unrealistic ways. His criticism was simple but powerful. Hollywood had spent years treating Native American characters as something less than fully human. He played a quiet giant, and his performance became one of the most memorable parts of the movie. What would make Will Sampson stop an entire Hollywood movie in its tracks? Why did Will Sampson refuse to step in front of the camera? Let's find out. The day Will Sampson refused to work. In 1976, Robert Altman cast him in Buffalo Bill and the Indians, alongside Paul Newman and Burt Lancaster. The film was a different kind of Western because it questioned many of the stories Hollywood had told about the American frontier. Eastwood was known as a director who liked to cut anything that felt too long or unnecessary. But when he saw this scene, he kept it exactly as it was. He understood how powerful the moment was. There were no special effects and no music. It was simply two men sitting around a fire, making a choice not to kill each other. The scene is still seen as one of the strongest exchanges ever filmed in a Western. Then came The White Buffalo in 1977, starring Charles Bronson and featuring Will Sampson as Crazy Horse. That movie became an important turning point for Will. He was no longer just another actor trying to find work. Will walked onto the set, looked at the cast, and quickly noticed something was wrong. The movie was set on the American frontier. It had several Native American characters, but almost all of those roles were being played by white actors. Production came to a complete stop. An entire Hollywood movie had been brought to a standstill because one man decided he had seen enough. Native American characters should be played by Native American actors. He did not want Hollywood putting makeup on white actors and pretending that was real representation. The studio did not agree at first, but Will refused to give in. Eventually, the production made changes and brought Native performers in to play the Native roles that were still available. Will was not the first person to challenge Hollywood over its treatment of Native Americans. In 1973, Marlon Brando had sent Sachin Littlefeather to refuse his Oscar on his behalf. Brando was already a major white Hollywood star with enormous power. Will Sampson was a Native actor, putting his own career at risk. His main weapon was simply refusing to move and standing firmly behind what he believed was right. That experience changed the way Will looked at Hollywood. He realized that fighting one movie at a time would never solve the bigger problem. Native actors needed more than protests. In 1983, Will Sampson and his assistant, Zoe Escobar, received a $30,000 grant from the Administration for Native Americans. They used the money to create the American Indian Registry for the Performing Arts. They built a central directory listing Native American actors, actresses, dancers, musicians, stunt performers, and film crew members available for work. Studios could no longer say they could not find qualified Native talent. The registry gave them direct access to hundreds of people who were ready to work. So, what do you think about Will Sampson in Hollywood? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.